The thing about mind-body disorders is that the symptoms aren't what need to be healed. The symptoms are simply a presentation of what really needs to be healed, which is your nervous system. That right there is a quote from my guest today's best-selling book, The Secret Language of the Body. I am so excited to introduce you to Jennifer Mann, a former world-traveling professional ballet dancer, now author and recovery program creator, someone who has brought and continues to bring healing to so many after recovering herself. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Raelan Agle, and it's my privilege to share recovery stories from conditions like CFS, Long Covid, vaccine injuries, and similar conditions. Here, we're all about learning from each other so we can make better choices for our health. I'm so thrilled to talk to Jennifer, who is over in beautiful Bali, Indonesia, who turned her horrific experience with CFS and a long list of other diagnoses into a profoundly changing journey of growth and inner work. She's here, fully recovered, ready to share her wisdom to spark much needed hope in our community, as well as the knowledge and practical tools that you can consider starting to use today. Jenn, so ridiculously amazing to have you here. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Raelan. I've been following your work for a long time since I was sick. So to be here and to have this conversation with you is very precious to me.
It's so precious to me too. You and I started chatting a few years ago, and then I think we both just got busy and dropped the ball, but we've been wanting to do this interview for a long time. So really exciting stuff. And you are really literally changing the world with the work that you are doing. It is, I get goosebumps just thinking about it, the impact that you're having, the incredible programs and resources that you have available. So very excited to get into all of the insights and what's been working well with people. But you also have your own really profound and challenging and rough journey with this that led you to where you are now. So before we dive into all of that, can you tell us a bit about your health journey that brought you into what you're doing right now?
Yeah. So I like to say that my journey started when I was born. And I was born into a house where there was various coping patterns on both my parents' side, a little bit of anxiety, depression. And then my parents divorced when I was 5. And I started to have a lot of just a buildup of anxiety and these patterns that would keep me stuck in a state of freeze. So I would stutter. I couldn't speak for certain periods of like my 9, 10, 11, 12. I would stutter so much. And so there was this buildup in my body of coping mechanisms that were helping me move through life and cope with the emotions that my brain felt were overwhelming. And I became a professional ballet dancer from a young age. I was born in Africa, moved to Italy, became a ballet dancer, went into a professional school at 13, away from home. And that's also an important part of my journey because of the traumas that I experienced in that time in those teenage years. There was a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of verbal abuse. So my already perfectionist who was trying to prove myself to the world because my dad had left, and I wouldn't repair with him until later on in my life. So I was moving through the world like, am I being valued? Am I being seen? Am I enough? Do people love me? So there was this, when we feel emotions like that, like grief, sadness, anger, anxiety, our physiology is producing that mirrored experience. So there's more stress hormones. There's an experience where your immune system is being affected. So even from a young age, I had chronic bronchitis. I had to have a surgery to remove my adenoids, like health stuff, physical health, mental health, if I really zoom in on the whole picture. So going back to teenage ballet, and then I graduated, and then I got the Epstein-Barr virus. I got mono, but I didn't just get mono. I remember dancing. I got this contract in Germany, and I was doing Swan Lake, and it was towards the end of the production, and I was really tired. And then I remember going to a friend's house, and like I was breathing, and my organs were kind of hurting. It was a real weird feeling. So I went to the hospital, and they told me, you have mono, but a very severe stage of it, and all your organs are swollen, and you need to rest for the next 3 months and stay bedbound. So that was my first experience of like sort of being this super active ballet dancer who was often injured, which is connected to anxiety, but we can talk about that another time. And then when I got mono, you know, other people get mono and they don't even know they have it. Like my husband, he had mono when he was a teenager, and I don't know, he had a fever for like 30 minutes, and then he was fine again. Whereas for me, it was this, you know, my immune system was like, wow, this is a lot for us. Like, this is a lot. So, you know, there's a baseline that isn't necessarily regulated and has the capacity for stuff, whether it's viral, whether it's a toxin, whether it's emotional, psychological, physical. So I'd been training my body so hard. I had this anxiety and all these patterns in my body. I had now this viral load, because Epstein-Barr gives you very big viral load that then you carry on in your life. And it comes on and off and on and off, depending on the level of stress in your body, how your immune system and your brain speak to each other, your gut and your brain speak to each other. So all of this is happening. And then I recover from mono, and then I go on and I dance around the world, and then I get an injury. And so my career shifts to body work and being really curious about the body, because I was often injured. So I was like, what is happening behind like, again, I'm asking myself, all of my colleagues are dancing as much as I am. Why am I getting injured? Why is this happening all the time? So that curiosity actually would help me later on as well when I had my chronic illness diagnosis. But leading up to that point, I was always so connected with the body, but I wanted to know like why and how. So I did all the things to learn Pilates, Feldenkrais, yoga. I started to teach all the things, gyrotonics, gyrokinesis, functional movement patterns, massage. And then I was like, it's not enough. I'm going to go back to school. So I studied biomedical sciences, physiotherapy. But when I went back to school, that the coping mechanism of moving through the world with that hypervigilance, am I enough, which was already heightened by performance, right? Like constantly being judged not only for how I move, but what I look like and how I speak. Or now I'm at school and now they're judging my capacity to like think and write, and they're grading everything. And I was like, you know, now in hindsight, I can clearly see, but at the time, I started to have pain in my body when I went back to school. I had pain in my shoulder blades, in my hips, in my calf muscles, in these key fibromyalgia areas. And so when I was in this experience, I was like, maybe I have pain, always justifying because I'm not dancing as much. And maybe because I'm sitting, maybe it's my posture. So, you know, the dancer in me who danced with bleeding toes for 15 years was like, pain is nothing. I can get through. I don't know. This is fine. So my body started saying, no, slow down, like very early on. I would say probably 4 years before I had my big crash. And so all of this is happening, right? So every part of my story I feel is so important, because when we miss the pieces out, we're like, but where did it begin? Oh yeah, my anxiety started because of university. But let's look at that. Did it really start? Yeah. Let's look at the patterns. What was underneath that? Why did being graded make your nervous system so on edge, so hypervigilant, so stress producing? So I feel like every part of our story is so important in understanding ourselves and this tapestry of our health and our life and our mind and our body and our brain and how it all connects together. So then I get to physiotherapy. I got the best grades. I'm class president. I mean, I was I was like older than everyone else. I wasn't 18, and I still was like, I'm gonna be class president. I'm gonna be the best. I'm gonna know everything. I'm gonna study. And I was getting straight A's and like crazy grades. And then the year before COVID happened in September, so I started to experience these intermittent fevers, which happened 2 years before the year of COVID. But they would happen for like a week with no symptoms. I'd have a fever and I'd feel tired. And then, so that was the beginning of the CFS ME pattern starting to show. But because after a week of resting, I would be fine, I was like, oh, this is actually fine. But it was inhibiting, my consistency, because for 3 years, if I exerted myself a lot, I'd be tired. And I was like, oh, maybe because I was a ballet dancer, I used my body a lot, now I'm just tired. And then the month of September, the year before COVID, I got a fever and it lasted for 2 months. And I remember pushing through and being like, you know what? This is so weird. I'm just going to do all the things anyway, because this is crazy. I have no other symptoms. I went to the doctor and they said, maybe you have invisible UTI, is the words that the GP used, the general practitioner in London. Maybe you have, I was living in London at this point in the UK. Maybe it's just tiredness, just rest. Maybe you're burnt out. And I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. Okay. So it was like slowing down, but not really, because the fever was still there. And it was low grade. So I was still functional, but always these heat flashes and feeling a low level anxiety, a buzz throughout my body. And I'd been having panic attacks since going back to university. So I was managing this whole health thing. And then I was like putting it behind me or sweeping it under the rug. And I was like, it's kind of this whole glomerate thing. And I was like, yeah, let's just ignore that and keep going. And so then I kept going, and then it was January and then February. And then my university being one of the main medical universities in the UK, some of the first cases of COVID were at King's College and the hospitals around King's College. So when I had a fever and a cough in March, my husband, who worked for the Olympic Association for canoeing, he had to inform them, and they knew I was at King's College, and they were like, oh my gosh, you guys have to stay at home, isolate for like 3 weeks, even before the whole thing kind of broke out. But there was already a voice of, and so at the time there wasn't any testing. So we didn't know if I had COVID. I just had heavy, like aching lungs. I had chronic fatigue symptoms. So my lungs were hurting, my body was heavy. If I walked a little bit, I would feel like I had a flu. I had headaches. I felt nauseous. So we did this isolation. I stayed home for 3 weeks and I felt better. And then it went away and I was like, okay, I guess maybe that was COVID. So then I go back to school and then the whole COVID thing happens. And in May, we moved house and I was doing just some very simple yoga. And I heard like a crunch in my spine. And that was the beginning of, it was the last straw to break this camel's back that had been trekking through the desert for 9 years. And it was made up of a puzzle of, the 4 or 5 years of these patterns of pain and fatigue and fevers and panic attacks that were not going away. They were coming and going, but they were getting worse over time, really affecting my stability, let's say. And then I had this yoga at home. I hear the neck crunch. And then I have what you would call a whiplash. So I had pain in my whole back. And for someone who is so into the body and physio, I was like, I know what this is. Yeah, I'm just going to rest and I remember it was the weekend. So I was like, perfect. It was meant to be. I'm just going to rest Saturday, Sunday, be back on Monday. And I didn't get out of bed for a year and a half. And what happened is that with from the backache, Monday I got started to get a fever again on the Sunday. And then it just was really bad this time. And I kept trying to week 2, week 3, what's happening? This is different. Something is weird. This is different. And we had flights booked for Italy to go and visit my family, my mom. And we flew to Italy. And I remember at the airport, I needed a wheelchair. And I was like, what is going on? This is crazy. We got to Italy. And then I was like, I couldn't speak. I couldn't open my eyes. And so that's when I started all the investigations. And I flew back to London shortly after because the investigations were getting complicated and confusing. And basically within a few months, they diagnosed me with first a fatigue syndrome because it was too soon, then over time, ME, then fibromyalgia pain patterns, POTS, and I also found out I have HEDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which we can talk about, but it's when the collagen in your body is a little bit less tightly packed. So you have a higher propensity for pain and fatigue. And it's genetic, but it doesn't affect you unless you have something like this. But yeah, then Raelan, the story of all of us is I tried all the things, I got all the diagnoses. I got really hurt by a lot of doctors telling me I couldn't have kids, I couldn't recover. There was this one neurologist that looked me in the eye and said, with this pattern and severity and how healthy you were before, it's likely that you're never going to get back to your normal functioning because it's likely that your mitochondria are damaged and there's no way back from there. So then they sort of diagnosed me with mitochondrial dysfunction and so on and so forth. So then I was like, I don't know if this picture, I was obviously devastated and angry, but over time, the picture didn't quite add up and everyone was saying different things. And I would go to the pain clinic, the fatigue clinic, and the pacing would make me cry. Everyone was not knowing exactly how to help. And so I tried traditional therapies like cycles of antibiotics and immune therapies, and then all of the functional medicine, then all of the holistic, the Perrin technique, massage, osteopathy, shiatsu, acupuncture, all the things, until I watched a video on YouTube and of a girl called Sarah. I don't know if it was you actually who interviewed Sarah.
It's too hard and with the high expectations and stressful jobs and
definitely, yeah. I think so. And I was taking on extra things, I was tutoring after my hectic.
She'd done the lightning process, and I was with the Optimum Health Clinic for a few months, but I hadn't had any results. So I had a few therapists, but I hadn't achieved. And then I learned about this full recovery in a few days by Sarah, and I was like, what? I contacted her. Is this true? Are you lying? Are they paying you to say this? What's going on? She was like, no, it's all the truth. And so that's when I started. I learned the brain retraining, and then I was like, shh, and then I started doing all the courses, and then I started to learn so much more because the lightning process was the beginning of getting me out of bed. But then I would get a call from my dad, and then it would be like I could feel the heat again and the fatigue and the things like that. So what helped me was putting together the whole picture and resolving it from the inside in, like the patterns, the emotions that were not being resolved or felt. And now I'm going to stop talking because that was a TED Talk. I'm going to pass it over to you. But I feel like I was like, all these pieces, and I have to share them because sometimes there's some missing or pieces where you're like, oh, I didn't know that piece was important. I didn't know that part mattered. And it all matters. And then it all makes sense when, yeah.
Hey, each person I talk to, still, after quite a few years of recovering and a lot of interviews, I still understand even my own journey a little bit better when you're talking. Like, when I think back to the perfect storm of what brought on mine, I don't go as far back really as I think I should. Like, when did this really start? My really high anxiety, high alert fear responses for me started in junior high, when I was probably 13 years old. So yeah, it's a lot. And I'm sure that could have been a 20-hour TED Talk because you just summed up decades, like so much. And we still skipped over a ton. It's a really challenging thing.
Yeah.
So where are you now, health-wise?
I'm fully recovered. I have a son. I exercise, like just completely. I have more energy than I ever had in my whole life. Even when I was a ballet dancer, because I was influenced by, these responses in my body that were affecting my physiology from a very young age. So although as an elite athlete, you get tired, I was like very tired. I remember I couldn't even like cook myself a meal sometimes in the evening. And other people could. And I did question that. I was like, why am I always so freaking tired? And I don't have that now. And my capacity, my perception of myself has changed. My brain, I don't get stuck anymore. And it's not that I don't have anxiety, that I don't feel a feeling of depression sometimes, or that I don't feel fear sometimes. It's that I know it, I recognize it, and I know what to do with it, and it passes and it goes away, and it doesn't affect the cells in my body in any way, shape, or form in a way that it used to.
So when you actually got into the nuts and bolts of recovery, when you started to find your puzzle pieces, you've talked about some of the programs that you did, but what did your daily, weekly routine look like? What were the things that you were doing that pulled you out of this really intense place of feeling unwell?
Yeah. So at the beginning, it was the Lightning Process by Phil Parker, and it was amazing. And I took it I was like, I'm learning this brain retraining, and I had this belief that this was going to heal me. So for me, I wasn't like, I'm going to do it a few times. I was doing it like 300 times a day. So I would wake up and I would do it over and 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 over, nonstop. It was like something had clicked, and I was like, it wasn't, it's that I would feel a shift and I'd be like, let's keep going. I feel a shift. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Because I could feel myself, the second you come out of it, your body wants to go back. Your mind wants to pull you back in because that's what it's most familiar with. So at the beginning, that's what my day looked like for a few weeks. Then I started to have a lot more capacity, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm healed. I'm fully recovered. And then I would have some setbacks. I'm like, oh, actually, wait, I'm not fully recovered yet. And that's when the polyvagal work came in, the vagus nerve work came in, the somatosensory work of stimulating literally working with the body's skin, muscles, nervous system to stimulate your brain in a different way as you practice new thoughts and as you learn to sit with the emotions and feelings that you have. So that's happening. And then somatic experiencing came in. So a more sort of in-depth approach to these sensations and feelings that I was feeling in my body that once I wasn't triggered by them. Because when you have physical symptoms, connecting to your body is probably the most triggering thing ever, because your attention is focused on these symptoms 24/7. You're constantly tracking, you're constantly aware of them. And so once I that was gone through the brain retraining, through the polyvagal, the somatosensory work, the vagus nerve work, then I was able to work with my traumas, with my patterns. And really, it was just the unresolved. So it's not like I hadn't worked on my traumas. It's that there was still a lot of unresolved emotions that were coming up in my day that I was repressing, that were causing stress. So then I would have a setback. So that helped me to recognize the feeling in my body and change my response to it. So it's not like I was like, oh, okay, I'm feeling fear. Okay, vagus nerve exercise. Oh, and now brain retraining. It was like, oh, I know what this is. Okay, pause. And then become aware of what the flavor, what is happening in my body when this thing arises. And when you learn to just become more comfortable with that thing that arises, that emotion, that overwhelm, the situation in your body, your brain over time learns that it's safe. So when you feel the emotion that you're used to suppressing, or the stress that you're used to avoiding through coping mechanisms, now your brain is like, okay, I don't need to avoid, suppress, turn the page very quickly and distract myself. I can be here. And that changes the script, that rewires your entire hierarchy of survival system in your body, which is your nervous system. So to answer your question more precisely, at the beginning, it was prescriptive. Over time, like it was like this exercise. And then when I learned that it was all about my awareness and response to stimuli that were triggering anxiety and fear, when that happened, then it was all about using the tools when I needed them, and then making sure my brain was getting this new message time and time again through the body, through the muscles, through the brain, through sensation, through inner child work, through somatics, that indeed the experience I'm having is okay. So that is the truth of my, like, I didn't have like a routine. It was more like just this increasing awareness. So whatever I was doing, it became a priority. So instead of like, maybe I went back to work, I started studying again. But if something came up, I would stop everything. Like that was my priority. So I would say that was an important part of my, just how I went through these things in my day. I wouldn't leave it for later, or, I'll do a Qigong lesson tomorrow. I was like, no, this is important. This needs to happen now. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm wondering, because a lot of people reach out to me and ask, or I see comments in the videos, or even just my own experience, that it can be challenging. There's not a lot of talk about how you navigate that place where you are recovered and then you're just living.
Yeah.
There can be residual, PTSD. There can be, fear of any kind of feeling bad. How much of this am I supposed to keep doing? So what does that look like for you, navigating, coming out of all those symptoms and living a pretty much symptom-free life? How do you navigate that? What's that been like for you?
It was a transition. It was very hard at first. There were a lot of things that were very triggering, and that would start the beginning of what I was used to feeling as a symptom. So maybe like for me, the first sign was the heat, and that heat would stay over time and turn into a fever. But when I was recovered, let's say after a year, still for the following year, it took me, I would say, a couple of years to wake up and not think about my symptoms or the illness or anything like that. And even today, sometimes, for example, it happened recently. My son I'm still breastfeeding. My son is 2 and a little bit, so we're going to start to stop. And breastfeeding is very hard on the body. So sometimes you feel tired, and it's easy for someone who's had the past experience of CFS ME to question, is this fatigue? Is this tiredness? Like, is it real? Am I tired? Have I done, like, what's happening? So that little kind of conversation between the mind and the body and the brain and present and past still happens, but now it's not a spiral. Now it's like, okay, I'm feeling tired. I breastfed. I haven't slept well in 3 weeks. My son was sick. Then my husband was sick. Yeah, it's okay for me to feel really exhausted and for me to take a day to just do nothing. And part of the pattern that I had was, guilt in doing nothing, that perfectionism, high achieving, that is so classic for chronic illness, for people who have chronic illness, because that's part of why we get sick. There's a persistence in a pattern because we're so, we don't know when to stop. We don't know when to slow down. We don't know when to give our body the space to breathe. So I would say over time, it was a lesson that I learned through trial and error. And when I say trial and error, I mean that at the beginning, I would get a bit afraid. And then it would take a couple of days to remind myself, no, I'm in a different place now. And then over time, that becomes just like a thought, like, I'm tired, I'm feeling very exhausted. Oh, but this and this and this and this. Okay. And so my brain is not now sending a fear signal throughout my body, being like, alert, recognizing this familiar feeling of chronic illness. Yeah.
I find with this that because the pendulum has to swing really far one direction in our response to symptoms, because we're so used to listening to our body, being alarmed by symptoms, thinking something's horribly wrong. So we have to train ourselves to be like, okay, it's fine. Even though I'm feeling all these symptoms, I'm not even going to pay attention to them. My body is fine. I am fine. Everything is okay. So we do all this training to essentially ignore symptoms, and then we come back to more where we should be. But now I found I've had to come back from the other end, because now I'm like, all symptoms mean nothing. Push through, push through, push through. So I have to stop myself and say, wait a minute, like, I'm really tired. I'm feeling wrecked. Is this symptom a normal reaction to my life? And I think, yeah, I've been working crazy long days. I've been burning the candle at both ends. So that's been a challenge for me. And I imagine it is for a lot of people, just training yourself to ignore symptoms. But then that's not a way to keep living the rest of your life either, because you also need to pay attention and have that conversation with your body about what it needs when it needs rest, when it needs food, when it needs water, all of those things. Yeah. So it's like reverse brain training. Now you have to come back and be like, okay, now listen to your body again.
Totally. And it's like when we do that interruption so that the brain doesn't initiate the symptom cycle and patterns, it's exactly that. It's like this moving away from it, like creating more distance, more distance, more distance, more distance, more distance. And then, as you said, you're in this place where there's so much distance where you're like, I'm fine. Wait, but I just still have needs. So it is. I love the way you described it. It is, and then finding your way back to a center. Yeah, I love that. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's quite the journey, and I suspect it stays with us for all of life. There's always going to be little things that we're processing and working through, but it just takes up less and less and less space each passing year. So you talked about, so you have a son now, and I'd asked you before we hit record, I'm like, is that him in the background? You're like, no, those are chickens. I love it. I keep hearing them perk up. They want to be in the interview. I've got a fly that wants to be in my end, so I think you've got the better deal. Back to my question. So having children now, how do you approach that and passing on those, awareness of patterns? Because my mother had chronic fatigue syndrome, and we suspect her mother had chronic fatigue syndrome. So for a long time, I thought it was genetic. And now I believe it was more learned patterns of ways of being, and different other things that we inherit from our parents besides genetics. So how do you approach that now as a mother? How do we sort of break that cycle or set other people up for success to not face these same really horrendous things that we went through?
Yeah, I love that. I'm really passionate about that now. And similar to you, my mom never had chronic fatigue, but she did have a lot of chronic symptoms like chronic migraine, very frequently, every week for years, and a lot of health issues that were, the way her body was expressing the same patterns of anxiety and avoidance and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to get to the heart and the meat and the core and the juice of it is we all have a nervous system. And it's amazing because if you're human, you have a nervous system. Actually, if you're an animal, you have a nervous system. We all have nervous systems. But when we become aware of this conversation that's happening between the brain and the body all the time, we learn that we have an influence on the outcome of this conversation. We can change the conversation. So previously, if your pattern is high achieving perfectionism, anxiety, hypervigilance, and, just by inertia, you have children and you are that way, it's also helpful to sort of not put the pressure on yourself. Like if you are that person and you have kids, it doesn't mean that your kids, everyone is different and everyone's story is different. But something that's helpful is to become aware of our children. And I think this is hard to hear, and it's hard when you are aware of it, but your children don't just learn what you say to them. Your children learn from how you breathe, what you say to yourself, how you walk, whether you're tense or relaxed, how you resolve conflict, whether you storm out of the house or you take a moment and then you apologize to your partner or to your child if you got angry at them, to your eating habits, to how you look at yourself in the mirror. And this is really part of like human physiology and evolution. Our brain has this amazingly engineered timeline where we literally rely on the adults until we're old enough, and then we've learned the pattern. And the pattern we've learned is from we don't just learn how to move through life by ourselves because our brain isn't able to. It needs to understand through mirroring. How do I respond to an argument? What is my relationship to food? What does mom and dad or my primary caregiver, like, how do they resolve that? Okay. So then our brain that has this prefrontal cortex that's still developing over time and a nervous system that's still relying on like emotions rather than this decision making, critical thinking. It's very primitive how our children respond and learn from us. It's like glue. It's osmosis. You are, your child is. And so having said all that, which is hard to know for myself as a parent, it's hard to hear if you are as a parent, I will also say that you don't need to be perfect to be a good parent and to interrupt these patterns. In no way, shape, or form. You don't need to be perfectly regulated. You don't need to practice nervous system regulation and be perfectly healed to interrupt the cycles that might be moving through your family. What it takes is just a bit of awareness and space. So if let's say you have XYZ patterns, relationship to food, how you resolve conflict, how you are with yourself, how you speak to your children, if you just become a little bit more aware of your instinctive reaction that is like, wow, I really raise my voice when I get upset and I can see my child is like, affected by it, or I notice that I'm on my phone all evening and maybe that's why my kid's crying and, just annoyed or seeking behaviors that are calling my attention. And it's really just about a little bit of space. So you can still go on your phone. You can still raise your voice a little bit. It's just like, I'm aware this is happening. And it's interesting. Awareness is the first step to any change. You're already making change. You're already stepping in a new direction when you become aware, because when you are aware, you're like, oh, I think I want to change. It's like this domino effect that happens, that when you are aware of how things are impacting those around you, especially your children, and you start to respond in a new way when you choose to. So a beautiful choice that you can make is just to take some space between the reaction and the response. So if your reaction is explosive, or if you feel the urge to slam the door or say something like, God, I look ugly today in front of your kids, just, oh, wow, I just noticed that. Maybe next time I can just take a pause, maybe go to the other room for a moment and notice what happens when I just take a space in between that trigger and my reaction. And that in itself is already beginning this new conversation in the body, which then moves on to your children. So again, you don't have to be perfect to be a wonderful, supportive, nurturing parent. You have to be good enough. And there's so many studies that say that it's really not about the rupture, like the amount of rupture, it's about the repair. So if you raise your voice, if you say the thing, and then you apologize, and then you say, oh gosh, I know I said that I felt I'm ugly, but actually, as I look at myself, I can really appreciate myself, even if it's not how I would love to feel this morning. So it's more about the repair for the child's nervous system and brain than the rupture. So you can have many ruptures, and with the awareness, you have a chance to take a space and then repair. So I hope anyone who's listening can feel that hope in, like, you don't have to be perfect, but with the awareness, you can always lean on the repair.
I'm pretty sure I heard a collective just exhale when you said that, of people watching just like, oh, thank goodness. Okay, because I'm going to blow up once in a while, and I'm going to say the wrong thing, and I'm going to look in the mirror and say something I shouldn't, and there's no perfect person on the planet. There's no perfect parent on the planet. So you're right. It's just being aware, doing the best you can, and then doing some repair on those inevitable times that are going to happen.
Totally. And those little changes are actually so big, because without that awareness, you're just marching at the same rhythm or a similar rhythm to, your mom or your dad or your primary caregiver. And so if you have that awareness and that space, and you give yourself that grace, and you're in a totally different place, and you're doing an amazing job.
Yeah. You mentioned nervous system regulation, and there's a lot of talk about this now, or different terms that people use for it. So what is your thought about the nervous system approach? Like, what is happening there? Is it dysregulated? What is this situation?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Actually, I'll be watching a movie or something with my husband, and then a lawyer or some random character on the movie, a policeman, I don't know, whatever, they'll be like, oh, my nervous system is so I'm like, whoa, what? It's moving everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's like on shows you would never expect it. I'm like, oh my goodness, like everyone's talking about the nervous system. It was like nobody was. It felt like 10 minutes ago, and we're like, we have this thing called the nervous system, and now the mailman's like, hey, sorry, my nervous system's out of whack today. Yeah. So is it out of whack, or like what's the best way to understand this from your perspective?
I love this. Okay, so our nervous system has so many jobs, and its main job is to make things run automatically in our body, right? So it is one of the main forms of communication. Like, we have our endocrine, like our hormones and our blood, but the nervous system is actually, I see it as like the orchestra director of all the systems. So immune system responds to signals in the brain. The brain is the nervous system. So it's like whatever is happening that is coming from your gut, your brain, your heart, the stimulation, the initiation, the reception of information and sending out information is through your nervous system. And your primary job of your nervous system, aside from helping your body run automatically, which is why it gets us stuck in the first place, right? Because if it wasn't automatic, we'd constantly be choosing. But because we have patterns, it's just unconscious. And then we find ourselves with XYZ experiences and we're like, how did I get here? And your nervous system was doing its best, and here we are. But the other thing is that it's very primal. It's like, am I safe or am I not safe? That's all it cares about. And from the breakfast you choose, like, do I want carbs, or do oh, I'm really craving that bagel this morning, or oh, I feel like eggs and bacon, or whatever. There's something happening in your gut and your brain where your mind reaches a conclusion that you need those carbohydrates, you need the energy, or no, I'm good. Actually, I don't want any breakfast this morning. And it's this communication, not through words, but through physiological signals, that is making all sorts of decisions for us all day long. And it's through the lens of, from A to Z, from 1 to 1,000,000, how safe are we right now? Are we super safe, or are we not very safe? And the safety is not like saber-toothed tiger, which is why our nervous system does this, because our world has moved forward so quickly, and we've evolved, and we have phones, and with our phone we know what's happening in China, in all the parts of the world, and our nervous system is still saber-toothed tiger. No, okay. Water, food, oh my gosh, argument. And now we have this overload of information, and it's like our nervous system hasn't updated yet to move through the stressors quick enough. It's like capturing information. I see it as like this librarian that's like, oh my gosh, I can't keep track of all the things that are coming in. Like, how do I track all this information? And then she's making mistakes. He or she is making mistakes and logging in the wrong stuff and getting confused and overwhelmed because it's just not quick enough. And so things like light, anything through our senses, taste, sound, light. You know how when you get sick, it's very common, even when you have a flu, but I'm talking about like a chronic illness, your senses are often very affected. So you have light sensitivity, touch sensitivity, sound sensitivity, blurry vision. That is your nervous system. Your nervous system has decided the world that is giving me information is like too much. So I'm going to like tone some of the stuff out and pretend I'm not hearing and pretend I'm not seeing this very bright light. So there's like this adaptation that happens. And actually, physiologically, this adaptation is called allostasis. And allostasis happens over time when there's these changes that don't bring you back to your normal. So the librarian is like, and that's her new normal. That's what she's doing all the time. There's not a like, oh, I logged everything, now I can go to sleep and rest. And that's homeostasis and balance. It just keeps going and going. And there's more stuff that's being caught up with and not being caught up with. So there's this old system in our body that is made to keep us safe, to experience stress as a way to survive. But it's not made for us to experience stress over time. Stress plus stress plus stress plus stress plus stress. So what happens is we have a survival system in our body, and our nervous system is constantly scanning through our senses, through our brain, through interoception, meaning all the signals coming from inside our organs in our body, through our blood, our heart, our thoughts, and exteroception, our whole environment, sounds, and like people's faces, which is where the polyvagal work comes in, but we don't have to talk about everything today. But all these different things are coming in from the outside in. The nervous system, when it has decided, based on usually our childhood, because that's how it learns how to cope with stress, later on, it already has a system to cope with stress. This is really key here. The nervous system, later on in life, as adults, already has a system to cope with stress. Whether it's a lot of stress or a little bit of stress, there's a system. And if it's too much, it's too much for everyone, right? But when we have a pattern in early childhood that starts because in our house, we're learning that emotions are unsafe, meaning dad gives us the silent treatment. Mom, when she's really anxious or stressed, she brings out the bottle of wine. So all we're learning is, okay, no emotions happen. All I'm seeing is the wine. I'm seeing the silence. I don't see any emotions. So when I get in an emotion, I'm like, what is this? Oh, get it away from me. So the brain, the nervous system, receives this interoceptive message. And in our childhood, we teach it it's unsafe. So there are these patterns that are ingrained that the nervous system is automatically tracking as unsafe, even our emotions, which is why nervous system dysregulation, simply meaning the way that we respond to stress over time and how our brain and body are communicating with each other, how well this resolves, because we all get stressed. It's not about, I'm always happy and positive and healthy, I never get sick. Like, that's not real life. It's about, I got sick, I got angry, I lost someone important in my life, I burnt out, and then I found my way back to normal. And how quickly that happens, or how quickly that doesn't happen, is where we have nervous system regulation or dysregulation. And, you know, you can go into it through all the different lenses, through polyvagal theory, through window of tolerance by Dan Siegel. There's all these frameworks to talk about the, you know, the capacity of the nervous system and what regulated versus dysregulated is. But really, when it comes down to it, it's our capacity to deal with stress and how quickly we recover from it. And as the orchestra director of the immune system, of the heart, and this and our circulation, and all the other things in our body, if it is dealing with hypervigilance and there's some sensitization going on, like physiological sensitization, which happens with chronic stress over time, then the signals that it's sending out, then when you get to a house that has a lot of mold, well, there you go. You're going to get sick, but you won't be able to recover as quickly as someone else who was exposed to all that terrible dark black mold. You get the Lyme, and all of a sudden, you're stuck with Lyme for 7 years already. You get COVID or the vaccine and you're sick and you don't understand why, or you have a burnout and then that's it for 10 years. So it's like coming back to places of regulation is supporting the librarian, the orchestra director of this symphony to come back to harmony, to get some new automated messages of safe, 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 rather than unsafe, unsafe. This emotion, unsafe. That person, unsafe. That bright light, unsafe. So it's this building over time of coming back to balance, homeostasis, and regulation is just that process. There's no such thing as like being regulated. And I think that on social media, sometimes that can get really mixed up. Like this is when you're regulated, this is when you're dysregulated, this is when nervous system regulation, nervous system dysregulation. It's more like a chronic state of not being able to recover versus having the thing or the things or the traumas and recovering. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like it's the way you're training your librarian. She was never really dysregulated. She just needed a little bit of like training on like, okay, this is how you code things and you understand what Reddit is and traffic jams and all of these things.
Yes.
So it's always kind of doing what it's supposed to. It just, sometimes we need to help it along.
Yeah, exactly.
So since you recovered, you have been doing amazing things. You have created a lot that is helping a lot of people recover. I know you recently published a book. So tell us about that. What have you been doing and what do you have available for people to support them on these journeys?
I have a program called HEAL that was formerly CFS school, meaning chronic fatigue school. And HEAL helps people who are experiencing chronic mind-body symptoms. Some people have come through our program with years and years of official multiple diagnoses, and other people come with a few years or months of multiple symptoms that have been happening for all the different reasons. There's this big umbrella. So if I were to list all these things, we would be here until tomorrow because there's so much that can happen in the body. But with HEAL, there is a somatic approach to brain retraining at the beginning. So you're doing the brain retraining, but you're already stimulating your skin, your vagus nerve, your muscles, so that the brain can pay more attention to what you're doing. And so when you touch your arms, for example, right now, so I'm talking to you and I'm squeezing my arms, my brain has started to reorganize itself in this moment. I'm talking to you and I'm doing this now. My brain has started to reorganize itself again because it's getting, sorry, that might have been loud, because it's getting new signals that are neuromotor, that are sensory, that are, deep touch. So all these neuroreceptors in our skin, in our muscles are like, hey, look at me, listen to me. I need you to, like, this is what's happening right now. And then there's a cascade of certain hormones. Like when you do deep touch, it feels really good. So while you're doing the brain retraining, it's so helpful for the brain to have this other shiny object that is regulating and reorganizing. So your brain is not just stuck in the state of fear and hypervigilance, but it's also constantly reorganizing itself. And, we have people who are bedbound, who have been doing this for many years. So all the types of people, and we cater for everyone. And then we move on to the polyvagal work, the vagus nerve work, and really that more functional approach to exercises that help reorganize your brain that you can use daily or in response to certain situations. And then we move on to a little bit of like NLP work. So future self, preparing your brain for situations now that you've done the brain retraining, and true self work, inner child work. And then we go into somatic experiencing and all these really important tools that help reshape how your brain perceives itself and your body, creating a sense of like this solid ground beneath you. And we're very passionate about non-prescriptive work after a certain portion of the program because we're all so different, and what I would say to you might not work for me or someone else. So that's really important. And we all have a different genetic and a different cultural background, and everything matters for who we are, how we think, and how our body works. So we keep all of that in consideration. And so that's the HEAL program. And we've had doctors email us full remission letters from RA, lupus, MCAS, like all of these really complex autoimmune disorders. And then the long COVID and the CFS ME and the pain community is huge, because it's just such a just the cadence of going from the brain retraining all the way to the end. The cadence of it suits a lot of people and how our nervous system works. So that's the program. And Raelan, I'd love to offer any listeners 50% off on our program, which we've actually never done before. We usually have a 40% offer, but you're very special to me because I watched your videos when I was sick. And one of the things that I'll never forget about other people's stories is the hope that kickstarted my motivation and the possibility of like, I can heal, I can do this. If someone else has done it, if so-and-so has done it, and that other person over there, like I can do this too. So that's really important to me. So I'd like to offer 50% off. And there's so many free resources on our website as well. So those are accessible always to anyone, loads of practices. And then I have my book here. It's called The Secret Language of the Body.
Amazing.
And it's available in all the bookstores, anywhere, in person, online. And it's a bestseller. And we're so excited. Yeah. And it's being translated into all the languages. And Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, is on the cover of our book. And when he read it, he said, inspiring, refreshing, and practical, a delightfully lucid guide to healing yourself. And that just means everything. So yeah, that's what I hope will help move this message on in the world. And now I live in Bali. After I recovered, I was like, let's move to Bali. Let's start our life there. I grew up in Africa and I wanted my son to have all of that raw, rich, wild experience that I so cherished about my early years. So, yeah.
Incredible. I have goosebumps once again just to think all that you've been through and how you are just doing incredible now and just happy just for you, never mind the impact that you're having on so many people out there. So incredible. Of course, people watching, listening, all of this is listed in the description. Do yourself a favor, expand that, take a look. She's got really great stuff. Find a way to get a little bit more Jenn in your life.